Okay, so we're recording tonight's meeting. I'm honored to welcome our guest speaker this evening. Her name is Naima Boudreaux. Her name sign is this. And it's an honor to actually have her as a special guest for our deaf professional meeting tonight, talking about mental health and intersectionality. I'm sure a lot of you are wondering more about that specific topic and would like to know more information. So that's our discussion this evening. So we're going to move forward with that topic. First, we'd like to know a little bit more about Naima, where she's from, how she got into her profession, and we'll start with that. So where are you from, Naima? What's your background? Tell us a little bit about your family. Hello, everyone. My name is Naima. I'm from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I work as an ASL teacher for now, but I am in mental health counseling. So I've got a grad school degree and I am playing catch up. Next year, I expect to actually graduate in 2023. So it's super exciting. Also, I have a side hustle, part-time job. I have my own business, Naima Eyes, that focuses on mental health, advocacy, and problem solving, for accessibility in mental health. The second side job that I have is part-time, and it's marketing coordinator with the National Deaf Therapy. And I think that's it. Okay, great. So now we know what you're doing. Let's go back to the roots. Tell me a little bit about your family. Was your family deaf? Were they hearing? Were there deaf and hearing members of your family? Most of our audience here this evening have children from birth to 5. And if you can think back to your age, to when you were that age, was your family hearing or deaf, and how did you navigate that? All of my family were hearing. There was just myself, I am deaf, and my brother was also deaf. Out of everyone, we were the only 2. I'm 27 years old. My brother he's 12 years old. Big age gap there. But we are still close. We get along just fine. I remembered wanting a deaf brother or sister. It didn't matter to me. And then, wouldn't you know it, it happened. I don't know why it happened. There's no deafness in the genealogy of our family. But for some reason, the Pennsylvania School for the Deaf, where I attended, I was a SODA. And Briella says, what is a SODA? It means a sibling of a deaf adult. So my brother is deaf. There was just the 2 of us. And all of the other siblings from my family were all hearing. So who knows why the deafness showed up. And it's, skipped many generations. And then, there's 2 of us. So we got that your family is hearing. And how did they react when they found out that you were deaf? I mean, was it a grieving process for them? Was it shock? Were they excited? What was your family's response? Well, my parents, my dad already had 2 boys from another marriage, and my mom had a girl. So when my parents were dating, they had me, and I was deaf, and I was the first for their relationship. Of course, that was grieving for them because they didn't know what to do. Lucky enough, there was much support and encouragement in my family. And my mom really helped me. She went to an audiologist. At that time, they weren't sure if I could hear or not. So the audiologist said, she is in fact deaf. I'm sorry. Now, back in the day, remember, they put a lot of deaf people into mental facilities or the mental hospitals. So my mom was really taken aback by that. You know, I'm thinking about, okay, Briella's asking, let's back up just a real quick. The audiologist told your mother that deaf people are put in a mental hospital? And Naima says, luckily they didn't put me there, but they were trying to find some sort of support, and they were able to find the Pennsylvania School for the Deaf. So my mom put me in with that program, and I was with them for the time. There were a lot of programs that I was involved with at the time. I forgot to mention that, who's hard of hearing? Oh, I am actually hard of hearing. I had speech class growing up and went through that whole process. And then, you know, of course, we had home signs and people spoke. When my brother was born, he's hard of hearing as well. We started to sign. And Briella is saying, good, that's great. Thanks for your background, letting us know where you came from and how, you know, all of that influenced who you are today. You mentioned that you are hard of hearing. Do you use any assistive listening devices or any assistive technology? The response is, I use hearing aids on both ears. Growing up, I used an FM system. I like the new hearing aids that they have now because they are Bluetooth capable. So I can listen to music, which I really enjoy doing. It's one of my favorite things to do. So I really love the Bluetooth technology. I can just put my hearing aids on. I don't even have to wear AirPods. So there's one last thing I would like to ask you before we transition to the topic for this evening. Do you have any advice for new parents? Things that your parents did for you that were encouraging, was encouraging to you, that may be an encouragement to our parents joining us this evening. The response is, first, I would say, don't limit your kids. You want to reach above and beyond in the expectation department. Advocate for your kids. You are the only one that knows your child. And you need to advocate for them. Maybe even if you don't agree with everything, still advocate. So for example, if in IEP meeting, you're going to have to advocate for your child. I remember back when I was younger at an IEP meeting, was one teacher that didn't feel I fit the deaf program. And my parents wanted me to have exposure to the deaf community, deaf culture, and all that is entailed with that, and felt that I was a good match for the deaf program. But they wanted me to be more challenged and have higher expectations. So there was a school across from my school, a private school, that I went to mainstream for English class. That was just the one class. And it satisfied my parents' desire for some higher expectations. And they advocated for me, which was really important. You have to advocate for your kids. That is wonderful advice, Naima. Thank you. Advocacy is such a big thing. So this is a great opportunity to transition. I realize before we can really talk about mental health and intersectionality, we have to understand what the word identity means. In the context of intersectionality, would you mind sharing what identity means? The response is identity means it describes who you are as a person. For myself, I consider myself biracial. So I'm a hard of hearing or deaf woman. That's how I describe myself. But identity is really how you describe yourself, which leads us to intersectionality. Intersectionality is really more of various identities. It's not, hold on a second. The interpreter, like, whew, something about America, I missed it. So marginalized, okay. So the identities are kind of marginalized here, often here in America. You know, there's oppression, there's discrimination based on people's identities. No, please continue on, Naima. So me as a biracial woman or I'm black and white mixed. And society looks at me like BIPOC. They don't look at me as white. So often when I go into some place, I do expect people to look down to me.
So that's basically my identity, and I'm deaf, hard of hearing, with no true access, and all the criticism that's going on around me. The world, we have a high number of hearing people, and it's fine. You know, everything that I can do, I can sign. You know, I can read body language, I can read lips. You know, that's part of my identity. And I'm a woman, so that's another part of my identity. And with the access in America, you know, being a deaf woman, it's even much more complicated. And that's the intersectionality. And Briella saying, with your experience, being biracial, being deaf, being a woman, all three of those identities, your experience through your lifetime has been different compared to me, for example. You know, I'm a white, deaf woman, and both of us have some identities in common. We're deaf and we're women, yes. But I would never understand what you had to go through, what your travels have been, being biracial, and that intersectionality is a big part of it. So now I understand the identity part of intersectionality. So with mental health, everyone has mental health. I mean, that's a natural thing. But in the big picture, we're talking about babies and mental health. I mean, 0 to 5, I mean, they're too young to have any mental health issues. I mean, is that a true statement? We got to realize that babies 0 to 5, they tend to have, kind of a spongy brain. They're soaking up all the information and they're just picking everything up as they grow, as they develop. And we have to really cherish their communication and how we communicate with them. We also have to
Attachment.
thank you, attachment. How we attach to the child, and that time is important that you develop with the child and how you communicate with them. I mean, if there's any kind of trauma, that some language is stolen from them, how they grow up in their life, is anything is going to pop up as they grow through life based on what they've noticed and witnessed. And that maybe they didn't connect with the one moment, my brain is like catching up. One moment. When the child is developing and learning and connecting with individuals, that's going to have an impact on them as they grow older. So I think mental health is really important because how they're raised, the environment that they're in. I mean, that's an important time because babies, they absorb everything. And the language that you share with them is really a big picture of how they develop later on. And ASL is that's a process, and you can really improve and with the communication, and they absorb more information. You don't want to ignore their communication. You don't want to ignore the child in their development when you're being able to communicate with them. I mean, just the from birth to 5 is an extremely important time frame for their development, their mental health development. I can imagine that, if they have a child has no access into communication, no kind of sentence structure, it could lead to frustration, anger, whatever barriers that are going to come up for them. And it does affect their mental health. It's, not a quick solution that you're going to be able to take care of it as they're older. This is something that develops over time. And Naima says, I would like to add that behavioral support professionals is really important for early childhood education. In schools, the kids, they tend to have a lot of tantrums. So it's really important to have communication, because they don't have any way of expressing themselves or knowing how to express themselves. So it's really important that they have that kind of communication to understand how they can communicate and express themselves. And, so that way you can also avoid those tantrums that they have. Yes, this is wonderful. And I can think of some things my siblings, my brothers and sisters. Um, I'm the oldest, and then I have a brother and a sister that are younger than I am. And I think was about 4 and I'm sorry, I missed, who's,
My brother was 2.
I was 4 and my brother was 2. So my mom told me, and obviously, this is just something that I remember, but my brother, every time that he would get angry and get frustrated, he would bite. He would constantly bite. And who he would bite would be me, obviously. And my parents, didn't understand why he constantly was biting me. And then my mom realized that he didn't know how to communicate. And so he was very frustrated. And he did not know how to communicate with me, like how to share, or maybe he wanted to play with me. And maybe I was doing something else, but he didn't know how to communicate his frustration. So he would just bite me. So my parents would punish them, but then they taught him how to communicate. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, did not. I'm sorry. The interpreter missed that. They didn't punish him. Instead of punishing him, they taught him how to communicate. And then once he understood how to communicate, he stopped biting. So, I mean, that was a good example of some sort of mental health issue that children can possibly have. And they were saying, the buildup for that is the communication. Mental health it's soaring. The mental health issues that are happening with children are soaring, and that has to do a lot backing up to communication. And that's correct, Brielle is saying. Now I want to look at mental health again. Deaf babies and hearing babies. Do you think that mental health issues are the same for hearing babies and deaf babies, or are they different? And Naima says that it varies with everybody. I mean, mental health will just come up, and it doesn't matter what the background. A deaf baby, you know, doesn't know how to communicate, where a hearing baby can hear, and they're in the hearing world, they hear things and they pick up more language. But a deaf baby, with especially a deaf baby that's born into a family that's all hearing, they don't know how to communicate with that baby. They have to have pick up sign language classes and expose the baby to sign language, but that communication is very different between the two children. And yes, that's correct. I'm thinking of a situation. I recently worked with a family, and we were talking about how important it is, for signing hungry. I'm hungry before I eat. So with a hearing baby, for example, they hear someone, oh, I'm hungry, and then they see them eat food, and eat different kinds of foods. Deaf babies miss that comment, I'm hungry. And they see somebody walking up and just start eating, and they don't hear that connection. So it's important, for the
For it to be intentional.
for it to be intentional, to sign. It's really, you have to be intentional about signing that I'm hungry before you eat, so that way there's a connection for the deaf children. And I see that there's something in chat. Let me focus on that real quick. Yeah, Amy, you could come up on screen and ask your question if you'd like. So thank you for, my question is, my daughter's 4. And she's biracial. And I'm sorry, Amy, you're freezing up. Um, her identity, I want her to be proud of her identity. How can she port her identity as a white mother? And Naima saying, my mother is white. And do we need to switch? Time to switch.
We have to be connected with the community, involved with community events, socializing with people who of all different backgrounds. Don't limit anyone to just your local area. Get out and meet people from all over the place. To be honest with you, I feel quite confident in my identity, and that happened later on in life. But when you have a mixed identity, it is complicated. So you have to really accept both communities. If you're Black and white, you have to accept both of them. And I still struggle with it some today, because I mean, how do I lead somebody? How do I lead another Black person? I have to have that same journey. So I would say that you have to figure out who your identity is. And that right there is quite a task. It's important to support different people. And I feel that, your child's young, so she's got some time to work through that. Does that help at all, Amy? Answer your question? And Amy's response is yes, that's perfect. Thank you. It gives me something to think about. Great. Thank you, Amy. Wonderful, Briella says. I'm glad Amy had an opportunity to ask her question before she had to leave the Zoom meeting. I imagine it is tough, actually, to navigate the biracial identity. It's a lot of things to consider, especially when it comes to intersectionality. Class is part of this. Access to language is part of it, where someone lives, all of these. And Naima is adding in, also education level is another big piece to this. Okay, so before we officially transition to the Q&A, I do have one more question for you, Naima. We talked about parents and advocacy and supporting their child. But we have professionals here also. And how can professionals support the mental health of children? I mean, the deaf school, of course, has American Sign Language, is accessible. And so the language portion is good, but we're talking about more of supporting and advocating for mental health. As an ASL teacher, I am definitely sensitive. I take time to check in with everybody. How was your day? It's, I like to chat and find out, where are people at emotionally? I take the time to do that during my classes. Some students don't have a dorm, so they are day students. They go back and forth between school and home. So I definitely want to touch base with them. Because especially if you see somebody kind of sullen just with their hand on their head at their desk, I want to check in with them. And I always make sure I tell everybody to have a great day, but I want everyone involved in the conversation. So check in with everyone's emotions you just never know what home life is for the students. So yeah, check in with them. Especially if there isn't any communication happening at home, Briella adds. So it's important, parents and professionals to keep in mind that if there isn't communication access at home, that at least we have it at school. But if there's no access to communication at school, then they need to have something at home. Preferably both school and home, but that's not always possible. It's important that, really that home has communication for sure. Okay. So I would like to open the floor up for questions. Please remember, everyone, that we do give parents and families the opportunity to ask questions first. Once they have asked their question, we will allow the professionals and other community members to ask their questions. Are there any parents in the Zoom meeting tonight that would like to ask Naima a question about mental health, about intersectionality, about identity, behavior, or anything like that? Come on, let's see what you got to say. You can go ahead and type your question in the chat if you prefer. You can open up your camera. You're welcome to voice your question, or you can sign your question. And Naima says, I don't bite. Come on. Everyone's still thinking of questions right now. Let's see. So while everyone is thinking, in the meantime, how can parents and professionals be mindful of intersectionality and how that impacts children? Ooh, that's a hard question, because the system is not designed for everyone. I feel like the system has racism, it has the able body system, and a whole gamut. And so it's hard because academically speaking, you have to follow what the curriculum is. For example, I have to follow the curriculum given to me, and I have to make that curriculum accessible and equal for all of my students. And my students are a diverse group. And we really have to dismantle the system and rebuild the system to include everyone. And that is a slow and arduous process. Professionals and parents, I have hats off to you, because I recognize and acknowledge, the task that you have. And, having different identities and not knowing who you are can really play with somebody's mind. So, people want to know, why am I feeling this way? Who am I? And it's important to for a child to figure out who they are and know who they are and be comfortable with it. I really like what you said. It's important to give time to the child to figure out who they are. And I'm sure there are some parents and some professionals who in their mind know what the child will become, or hope that the child will become. Will they be that person that the parents, will the child be what that every parent dreamed of? But that might not be what their identity is. You got to let the child have the ability to develop their own identity. One thing that comes to mind about developing an identity, and something you mentioned early, so I'd like to come back to it. Exposure to different people groups. So when you mentioned your past and your, background growing up, and your parents felt it was really important for you to be exposed to deaf culture and the deaf community. And I'm wondering now, if you look back, was that beneficial to you to meet different kinds of deaf people? Naima says, oh, okay, well, deaf people, it was only at the school for the deaf. I was in culture shock when I went to Gallaudet University. That's a different story. I went and graduated in 2018, and it was a shock. There were just so many deaf people from so many different backgrounds, and I mean from A to Z. And that's when I had that moment. Deaf people are so very different. My parents exposed me to the deaf community, yes, but again, mostly to hearing people. So, and I went to the Pennsylvania School for the Deaf, and, yes, there were deaf people there and I was involved. But once I wasn't necessarily with deaf people outside of the academic environment, but I am deaf and proud. Well, that's a very good point. And hopefully parents will take note of that. Their child needs exposure to different communities and different people outside of the academic school system, whether it's church, whether it's some sort of camp, you name it, whatever is available in their local area. And also, it is nice to educate other people. Let the child express who they are and proud of their identity, and let them feel comfortable around other people. Yep. Go back. Something. So Briella says, feel like your parents didn't. So my parents didn't tell people that I was a deaf person. I would tell my parents, don't say that. I will tell them when I'm ready to tell them, depending on the situation. If I needed to say it, I would say it. And my parents were like, oh, okay. So they stopped doing that. I wanted to advocate for myself. It wasn't always necessary to declare that I was deaf. And they were hands off at that point. And they felt it was important to encourage me and do whatever was comfortable for me. Because I didn't want any pity party from people, I mean, nobody wants that. That's a good point as well, because oftentimes our parents feel like they have to advocate for their children, which they should. Nobody's arguing that. But the fine line is where they're putting that advocacy on the child as well, oversharing and that type of thing. Okay, so it doesn't seem like the parents are in a listening mood tonight, not necessarily a questioning mood. So we'll open the floor for any professionals in tonight's meeting. There's a cat on my shirt. Can you see it? Okay, so there is a comment in the chat, and it's from Connie. She asked, what made you attracted to the mental health field, Naima? Well, I went through a situation after college, and I decided I wanted to, I was interested in counseling, and I was trying to find a BIPOC deaf therapist. And I realized I couldn't find one. And then I realized there's nobody for me. I have to do something about this. I have to do something. So I thought, you know what? I'm going to go back to school, get my graduate degree, and other people in the future can benefit from me. If they're looking for a BIPOC deaf therapist, they will find me. The numbers are small of BIPOC deaf therapists already. And I would say, BIPOC, well, we talk about BIPOC, biracial, deaf therapists. Oh, it's hard to find it. Just each time we add another layer, the group gets smaller and smaller. I can find Black hearing therapists that knows sign language, but that's even still hard. The numbers are so low. So whether, whoever you are, go for it. We need BIPOC deaf therapists and counselors and social workers. They're needed so desperately because the life events happen. There's trauma that happens in people's lives and they need this type of help, especially in today's age, for sure. I mean, every single day, something is happening somewhere. So thank you so much for your motivation and passion. And hopefully your work will encourage other deaf BIPOC people to get involved in the field. I do see another question in the chat. Tracy Duncan says, children's literature is simply amazing. Authors are increasingly addressing diversity and intersectionality. What do you recommend families and their young children explore as they look for books about them? That will lead, and the discussions from these books opens wonderful conversations within the families. So do you have any reading suggestions for families or for adults, for parents to read? So is it the question asking me what what kind of books I'm recommending? I think we're misunderstanding the question. So my book suggestions, let's see. Let's just clarify real quick. Okay. Okay, so a book suggestion I don't necessarily have, but there are a few books. There's a CODA author, child of a deaf adult. Oh, I can't. Is it called Beautiful Something? And Briella says, I think it's A Beautiful. And I feel like if you read that book, it deals with identities. So it's important to find what the book is about and sit down with the child and ask them, what do you see? Oh, you see that? Oh, and to identify the various pictures, expand on those pictures in sign language, have a conversation, ask the child, how do you feel about this portion of the book? Engage the child in conversation, because some books don't include everyone. They don't include a deaf person. Maybe they're just all hearing people. And you can talk about, the lack of diversity in a book. I would suggest maybe getting a book. Well, it's not, that's very inclusive. That's not very inclusive. And then get another book that is very inclusive. So that see if the child notices a difference and say, what's happening in these two stories? Start off with something like that and go from there.
Okay, so I see another comment from Diana. And it says, thank you for being here and sharing your story. I'm coming as a mama of a hard of hearing 3-year-old as a psychologist. Wearing my professional hat, I'm curious, what would current mental health providers and the next generation of mental health providers to know about working with the deaf community, working with translators, and holding an intersectionality lens in that work? would, well, it would be important to provide access for the meeting, because we have deaf services, counseling services, we have many different professional services that we need to provide access to. So, for example, I'm BIPOC, and it's very difficult for me to find a BIPOC therapist. But there's a lot of, white therapists that are available. Give them a chance to try it out, and maybe it's a match, maybe it's not. And I feel like people limit themselves because they think that they don't have any access to any other varieties of therapists. But you can look and see about BIPOC's therapists. I feel like they talk a lot about in school knowing ourselves and our biases. Thank you. They work with us, and I'm sorry, the interpreter's having some difficulties. It's freezing up a little bit, so I'm having a difficult time. So with my past, I know how to work with a variety of different individuals and deaf individuals as well. So I also feel like with mental health, the mental health industry should offer more communication, provide more communication, so that way we can understand and communicate even better. I want to review what you said. The mental health counselors and providers, they have to let go of their biases, and they have to understand and be aware of their biases. So when they work with people who are not like them, they can recognize their own biases, how their own biases influence other individuals. At the same time, they're also aware of they one moment, please. Let me back up. When they are aware of their biases, then they know who they can refer their clients out to so that they can get the proper counseling support that they need. The interpreter is having a very difficult time here. Sorry. The interpreter is having a difficult time today. And there's some babies. Thank you. Thank you.
Stop. You guys ready for jammies and night shows?
Okay. Michael,
Michelle.
I'm sorry, Michelle, said, thank you for being here and sharing your story. It is awesome experience of yours. So anyone else have any final questions before we wrap up as we get closer and closer to the end? And right now is the best time. No takers? Okay, it's all right. It's not a problem. if anybody has any questions that come to mind, you can always contact us, contact Naima. And, if you want to post your email address. Perfect. So if you have any questions, you can contact me or Naima. Her email is in the chat. And I really appreciate Naima's time. I really appreciate you so much. Your energy, your passion. I know that there's a lot of people like you. There's not a lot, I'm sorry, there's not a lot of people like you in the area. So thank you so much being a part of this program. And we have one last question and it from Tracy. There are several resources in Tennessee that professionals can connect with and learn from. Do you have any recommendations for links or resources? Will you send them to us after the event tonight? Is there anything that you could think of right now? And Naima is saying, we have,
National Deaf Therapist.
thank you. National Deaf Therapist. What's this? Spell that again.
Subscription.
Oh, I don't know that sign. Sorry. Subscription. I'm used to that being a different thing. Okay. So that's subscription. Sorry, I'm from California. And also some presentations. Thank you. Presentations as well. Thank you. Thank you so much, Naima, for your time. And thank you for everybody for coming. Really appreciate it. And Naima and says, thank you for having me here. And it was nice chatting with you.